So last night, in what somehow managed to be one of the most sickeningly cynical and fraudulent displays we have ever seen on the floor of Congress, and I understand what a statement that is, a group of Democratic representatives decided to hold a group therapy session. As the lockdowns continue to cripple American businesses, millions of our citizens face financial ruin, and our nation faces a host of crises from multiple fronts, the Democrats still carved out some time to talk about their feelings, their favorite subject, after all. This special House hearing was requested by Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, whose own cinematic tale of narrowly avoiding death at the hands of right-wing assassins took a major hit when it was revealed that the riot was happening in an entirely different building from the one she was in. Nonetheless, Cortez was given more time and space, on the taxpayer's dime, in this case, to spin her yarn. So here she is introducing the evening's program while unabashedly labeling herself and her colleagues as survivors. Listen.
Less than 29 days later, with little to no accountability for the bloodshed and trauma of the 6th, some are already demanding that we move on. Or worse, attempting to minimize, discredit, or belittle the accounts of survivors. In doing so, they not only further harm those who were there that day and provide cover for those responsible, but they also send a tremendously damaging message to survivors of trauma all across this country.
Survivors, yeah. AOC is as much a survivor of this riot as I am. She was never in any direct danger. She was never confronted by any mob. She did not survive anything except in the general sense of having made it through another day without dying, in the sense that we're all survivors by virtue of the fact that we're all still currently alive. If that's what she means, then fine. I'll wear the label too. I'm a survivor. Someone cue the Beyonce song. Now, AOC was joined in this spectacle by such squad luminaries as CORI and Rashida Tlaib. The former vacillated between openly weeping and boldly declaring that she would have personally whooped the asses of any rioters who tried to accost her. So here she is making that claim.
Madam Speaker, St. Louis and I rise to reflect on how our office experienced the white supremacist attack on our nation's capital on January the 6th. Everybody's experiences are different, and everybody's experiences must be validated. So I remember sitting in the office with my team and just thinking to myself, I feel like I'm back. At this very minute, I feel like I'm back. I feel like this was one of the days out there on the streets when the white supremacists would show up and start shooting at us. This is one of the days when the police would ambush us from behind trees and from behind buildings, and all of a sudden now we're on the ground being brutalized. It felt like one of those days, and I just remember taking a second thinking, if they touch these doors, if they hit these doors the way they hit that door, if they hit these doors and come anywhere near my staff, and I'm just going to be real honest about it. My thought process was, we banging to the end. I'm not letting them take out my people, and you're not taking me out. We've come too far.
Yeah, okay, CORI. You're about to go full Kill Bill, I'm sure. Had the katana ready and everything. Now, and she says it took her back to the days of white supremacists shooting at her. When were those days exactly? What is she referring to? That's a headline. I'd like to know what happened. She says that when they were shooting at us. Apparently, this is something that happened to her. I'm not aware of that story. Notice too how she casually labels the rioters white supremacists, as she has from the beginning. This isn't very interesting, as she thinks everything is white supremacy. She would probably label a literal jar of mayonnaise a white supremacist, but even so, it bears repeating that there's no evidence, and never was any evidence, that anything that happened on January 6th was at all racially motivated. For her part, Rashida Tlaib could barely speak through her tears, so overcome with emotion, even though she wasn't even in D.C. on the day of the riot. Let's listen to that.
So what happened on January 6th, all I could do was thank Allah that I wasn't here. I felt overwhelming relief. And I feel bad for Alexandria, so many of my colleagues that were here. But as I saw it, I thought to myself, thank God I am not there. I saw the images that they didn't get to see until later. My team and I decided at that point we'd keep the death threats away. We try to report them, document them, to keep them away from me, because it just paralyzed me, and all I wanted to do was come here and serve the people that raised me.
Now, she mentions earlier in her speech the death threats that she's gotten during her career, which have nothing to do with the riot, but death threats to a congresswoman or to anyone else are horrible. I can tell you that I know that from experience. I myself have had plenty of them. I've gotten messages, plenty of messages, saying terrible things about not just me, but my wife and my children. I've had violence threatened against my kids. It's very upsetting to endure something like that. I know from experience. And the people who make these kinds of threats or send these kinds of emails are vile filth, the lowest of the low. The point simply is that this happens to anyone in the public eye as a consequence, not of systemic racism or anything like that, but of living in such a tribalized society. Another consequence of living in a tribalized society, ironically, is this display on the House floor. This is political stagecraft disguised as raw human emotion. For proof of that, if you need it, here finally is Representative Dean Phillips in what was hailed as a moving and powerful speech, but what was really one of the most shamelessly cynical diatribes we have ever heard in such a forum. Here it is.
We know what it feels like, searching for something, anything, with which to defend ourselves, and realizing a pencil is about all we had. And we know what it feels like thinking that it's a real possibility that we would not see our families and loved ones again. We won't forget. We won't forget. But I'm not here this evening to seek sympathy or just to tell my story, rather to make a public apology for recognizing that we were sitting ducks in this room as the chamber was about to be breached. I screamed to my colleagues to follow me across the aisle to the Republican side of the chamber so that we could blend in. For I felt that the insurrectionists who were trying to break down the doors right here would spare us if they simply mistook us for Republicans. But within moments, I recognized that blending in was not an option available to my colleagues of color. So I'm here tonight to say to my brothers and sisters in Congress and all around our country, I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
Give me a break, dude. I mean, it's really quite brilliant, if also completely dishonorable and disgusting. He implicates all of his Republican colleagues in the riot, positions the riot as somehow racially motivated, and pretends to humble himself while at the same time engaging in naked self-aggrandizement. All in the span of 90 seconds. The whole show, the whole therapy session was in some ways a masterclass for those who are utterly soulless and care for nothing but power. Now, if you're not in that category, though, you will be revolted by the display, especially when you consider that these very same people did not care to hear the stories of trauma from their own constituents who lived through much worse, much more damaging, much more deadly rioting, sustained for a much longer period of time. Yes, I'll say it again, I'll say it 1,000 times. The rioting that happened in our cities was much, much, much worse than this. And the fact that this happened to politicians does not make it worse unless you believe that politicians are more worthy, are worth more, have more value than just regular citizens. I don't believe that. Our members of Congress endured an unpleasant few hours one afternoon. I admit that. None of them were ever harmed in any way. Afterwards, they were flanked by National Guard, fortified behind protective barriers. The world cared about what they went through. The system responded forcefully because, after all, these people are the system. And the people responsible are being hunted down and hit with every possible criminal charge. Okay, so that's been their experience. For average Americans, though, in towns like Kenosha, Minneapolis, Atlanta, any of the hundreds of other cities, for them, Portland, Seattle, it's been quite different. In many cases, their neighborhoods are still in ruins, and nobody cares. Nobody's talking about it. The people responsible have not faced justice. If they were arrested at all, their charges were dropped. I mean, they went through weeks and weeks and weeks of chaos, violence, and destruction, and when it ended, nobody helped them pick up the pieces. Nobody's bringing them up on the House floor to shed their tears under the spotlight. They suffer alone and they are forgotten. Even the people who are ostensibly on their side are too cowardly or too stupid to really help. After all, the Republicans could have done what the Democrats just did. They could still do it. They could have brought the victims of BLM rioting to Congress and set aside an hour or more for them to speak and tell their stories, to reveal their lived experience. But Republicans are too incompetent, or else disinterested, or else plain dumb to do something like that. And so the very people who normalized rioting and cheered it on and created the situation that we now are in get to make themselves the victims of it. Talk about privilege. What we saw on the floor of the House last night, that's it. That's what privilege looks like. Well, I hope you enjoyed that clip from the Matt Walsh Show. If you did, go ahead and hit that subscribe button right down there so you can stay up to date on all of our future content.